This is the Weekly Set, the official podcast of TheTotalScreen.com. Episode 189, recorded January 13th, 2019. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Weekly Set, the official podcast of TheTotalScreen.com. I'm your host. My name is Tyson, and joining me today, as always, is my partner in crime at The Total Screen, William Rohrig.
Hello.
So, today we are going to be talking about Black Mirror Bandersnatch, the interactive special. And we are also going to be talking about The Good Place, the episode The Book of Doug's, which has returned. I think it's only got a few more episodes this season left. I think it ends on 13. I'm not sure. But yeah, so we'll talk about those two episodes. Before we get to either of those, though, we are recording this on Sunday, January 13th. And as of the time of we are recording this, just like, I don't know, an hour ago, Game of Thrones, they announced the premiere date for the final season. It is coming on April 14th. It's a Sunday, of course, as always, the Sunday before Easter. So, yeah. I can just say I'm super excited. Will, I'm sure you are as well.
Oh, yeah.
So right. It's kind of a no-brainer to say that people are excited about Game of Thrones. Yeah, April 14th. We'd known it's coming in April for a little while now, but now we got the official date. I'm making my plans as we speak for my premiere party for it. But yeah, so that's coming soon. Finally, it's been a year and a half or more, almost 2 years. So we're gonna finally get our Game of Thrones fix. But let's jump into today's topics, starting with Black Mirror Bandersnatch. This is a interactive episode of Black Mirror with lots of different branching paths, kind of like a choose your own adventure. In fact, they're being sued by Choose Your Own Adventure.
Well, don't compare it to Choose Your Own Adventure, because it's not Choose Your Own Adventure. All right, that is trademark and copyright property by Choose Co. And this is in no way similar to anything by Choose Co.
There are more interactive elements that you couldn't do. I mean, you would have to make the book absolutely massive to do all the interactions that they're doing in Bandersnatch.
The fake Bandersnatch Choose Your Own Adventure novel in the show is like massive. It's like thicker than like the Bible or some shit. Like
it would have to be even thicker, and it would be annoying because you'd be jumping constantly because there's like all these little micro choices that have like these tiny effects, like what music is playing in the background in certain scenes, and like what commercial is going to be playing on the TV. So it's like you're going to try to fit in all of those. You're going to have to like rewrite the scenes over and over again.
It's great because you look at the book and your first thought is whoever wrote that had to have been insane or gone insane, and then it's confirmed, and then you're like, yep.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Makes sense. Yeah.
So this special episode of Black Mirror also employs one of our favorite newer tropes, I believe, for television, which is the unreliable narrator. So we have our main character is Stephen Butler, and the story is basically following him as he is making a game.
Wait. You say unreliable narrator. Who's the narrator?
Well, that's questionable. Like, I'd say Stephen Butler, like that's the name of the trope, but Stephen Butler as what seems to be the central character of the story. Okay. And I have other theories about that.
Who says you're not the narrator?
Yeah, I think that's kind of true, but then also, if I'm talking about me as the narrator, then I'm unreliable too, because I'm also insane.
Yeah, you're unreliable too. Don't trust anyone, not even yourself not trusting anyone.
Which means trust everyone, except I just said it, so don't.
Yeah.
But now that I've told you not to, you should. And we're just going to continue on with this line of thought for about 3 hours.
Yeah.
That's this podcast. But the lead character, the lead actor playing a character, I should say, is Stephen Butler. And he is a young man who seems to be a little troubled. He's having some issues with his father. He's on some sort of medication. We never really know exactly what that is. And he is making a game. The whole thing something set in the 1980s, early 1980s, and he's making a game for what's the game system called?
The ZX Spectrum.
It's for the ZX Spectrum, which is...
If I don't say it ZX Spectrum, like, people from the UK will hate me, so.
It's a system that I don't even think came out in the US.
Nope.
But it's like in the US, the closest comparable thing might be like the Commodore 64. It's a system that like...
Here's the thing, the ZX Spectrum in the UK, from my understanding, was just as popular as like the NES was in America.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was also something that was more directly programmable, and
it was a computer. So like, and this context needed, right? Because in the 80s, America, the NES hit it big, and so we stuck with consoles. But consoles kind of died around the mid 80s, and the NES didn't take off in Europe the same way it did in America. So Europe kind of gravitated towards computers for their games. And so that was like the major difference. So the Spectrum was probably, and it wasn't even like only a Spectrum. The Spectrum was just one of a bunch of computers. There were also like other massively popular, but the Spectrum.
Well, I mentioned Commodore 64, and that came out both in the US and in Europe and other places.
Yep, Commodore 64 was a big one. The Amiga was another big one.
Mm-hmm.
But like the Spectrum was like at the time one of the best sellers in the country, and so that's why I compared it to the NES, because it in terms of UK gaming, it was that massive. Yeah.
It's a system that's programmable, so like amateurs could make games for it, which is very different from the way the NES was. I mean, now you have people making past retro games and stuff, but like that has to go with like decades of emulation and shit later.
Well, like I said, it was a computer, so like you could do that with like any computer at the time. Even in America, if you owned an Amiga or a Commodore, you could program your own games. That's the major benefit of a computer over a home console is computers are programmable and you can do a lot more with them. So this is the UK gaming scene, and it centers around like he's developing a game for the Spectrum, and he goes to like this game company, this game publisher, who has like their star programmer, Colin, who has already himself programmed several Spectrum games, and they were all like, apparently like they were all hits. They were like all amazing. Like they have this like review, like this
he's the Miyamoto of fictitious Europe.
Yeah, he's the Miyamoto of fictitious 1980s Britain, apparently. Because like they have like this fictitious, or maybe it wasn't fictitious. I don't know, because I don't know anything about what was that, but they have this game review show. And there's like this kind of like dorky guy with glasses, and it shows him early on, and he's talking about like Colin's latest game, which is actually like named after an episode of Black Mirror.
Metalhead, I believe, right?
No, not Metalhead.
Which one was it?
The one, oh shoot.
They showed a few references to different episodes. Metalhead was one of them. Nosedive was another one.
Nosedive, that's it. Nosedive, which was the title of a previous episode of Black Mirror. I think the one about social media.
Yes, the one starring Bryce Dallas Howard.
Yep. So that's one reference I got right away. It was Nosedive. So he's reviewing this game Nosedive that this guy Colin made, and he's like raving about it. It was like the most amazing game ever made. So we're told off the bat that Colin is sort of a badass, right?
He's a known entity in the gaming world.
In the gaming world, yes. And so, go ahead.
So, Stefan is making his own game, and he gets an appointment with this game company, and he goes to this game company, he meets Colin there as well. He's not the boss of the company, he's just like the star of it. Right. The boss is a guy named, Mohan Takar.
Yeah, the boss is a money man who knows, like, nothing about actually making games, probably nothing about video games much in general.
Kind of a poser about that, though. He'll Colin will talk about like, oh yeah, it's a video RAM error or something, and Mohan will be like, yeah, video error, yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Or
yeah.
He doesn't know what the hell he's talking about.
He doesn't know. He's just a money guy. He's just financing it.
Yeah. So he offers Stefan a chance to make his game for this company, and he gives him the option to make it there, which is, if you choose that, is like your first kind of dead end path. If you choose to make your game there, it takes you to, basically it just cuts to like years later and it shows Stefan looking kind of depressed, sitting on the couch with his dad, and they're watching that video game review show, and it's just the guy's just railing on the game about how it's atrocious and a big piece of shit. And that's like the first bad ending you can get, basically. It's also the first time you get like a real piece of like meta storytelling, because right after you make that pick, Colin looks at you and says, "Wrong choice, mate." So if you did what I did, which is you get that ending immediately after reaching that point, and this is what happens with most of the endings that you get in this game, is it will kind of bring up a screen showing like a TV screen on it, and it'll kind of have like a flickering image of like the last choice you made, and it gives you a chance to go back to it. Now, when you go back to it, it doesn't just jump back to that point. It recaps like everything before it. And what's really cool is when it does that, certain things are changed. And when you get back to that choice, certain things are changed. Like characters act like they're somewhat self-aware of the fact that a different choice was made before. That's kind of like a deja vu kind of moment, which makes it, the whole experience kind of feel like a Groundhog's Day episode.
Right, exactly.
So yeah, and so it starts to get really kind of interesting. That like this is the kind of stuff that to me made this an actually interesting project, the Bandersnatch that is that if you just look at the kind of general story and the flow of it, and a lot of people have, and there's a lot of criticisms that you could draw. There's a lot of things you could say about the story not necessarily being that great or that fully developed and other things like that. What impresses me though is like the clever ways they do stuff like that, where they recap a scene that you've seen before, but they do it slightly differently, and they show characters going like, "Wait, haven't we said this before? Or haven't we done this before?" There's one moment, I can't remember around which choice it was, in which Colin, you reference something, and Colin says, "Oh, why don't you make this choice?" And he says, "Oh no, you don't make that choice. Haven't you read the book?" And he's like, "No, I haven't," or something. And then later on, if you make the wrong choice and get brought back to that moment to make the right choice, Colin says, "Yeah, you can't make that choice because this happens. You know, like I've read the book," or like totally different from he was before, even though they're in the same choice moment in the story. So it's showing that he's kind of like a different Colin or something than he was at that point. Like he has knowledge that the past iteration did not, which is like very Groundhog's Day. It also goes into stuff that Colin talks about later on. He has a moment where they're on drugs and he's talking about, you know, Pac-Man being about, you know, program and control, and about how it's a nightmare world in which Pac-Man can't leave the confines of the walls and the game.
That was like my sense that I thought, see, it's compelling what Colin is saying, but it's also like he's also high on LSD in that moment, and also like it's clear he's insane because of like what happens next.
Yeah. But what's interesting though is that in all of that, he also brings up a few different points that are relevant to the story. One is that he says that you can time travel through mirrors, which is like a direct clue towards something you can do later in the story.
It's correct clue, but see, this is where the story like kind of loses me, because that it's hard to parse what is actually real and what's going on is in your main character's head. I like to think like all of it's happening in his head, really. And
you could make that argument.
Everything leads me to believe that.
Yeah.
Especially one of the big clues that leads me to believe that everything in his head is because like as you go through events, as you go back and relive events, you get new options, you get new things to do. And so that really leads me to believe that, yeah, this is all happening inside of his head.
Or it's like a Groundhog's Day situation where like a wrong path causes you to come up with new pathways.
I would agree with it being a Groundhog's Day situation if like literally like impossible things didn't happen. Like you said, time traveling through mirrors.
Hey, well, Groundhog's Day doesn't mean that it can't also have other things going on. You know, like there's a Groundhog's Day episode of Supernatural. Supernatural also has demons and vampires, and you know, it's not exclusively a Groundhog's Day concept. You know,
but they didn't mix that up within the same episode.
Yeah, but the point being that they did have a trickster god that initiated it.
They had to have a reason for it happening, and the reason was obviously going to be supernatural. Hence the title of the show.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is I don't see that as like a fault. Like, I don't see that there's other weird things don't take away from the fact that it is a Groundhog's Day concept.
Right.
Because it is a Groundhog's Day concept, but it's not only a Groundhog's Day concept, is what I would say. So there's lots of stuff going on, and like you said, there's alternate paths that open up, which is very also reference to games. And if you do certain things in a game, that creates options that open up to you.
And also, like, some things, like, kind of negate the Groundhog's Day narrative. Like, there are definite endings to where, you know, like, there are definite endings. Like, there's certain things that you can choose to... See... This is difficult because there are certain things you could choose to happen, like the scene where Colin and the protagonist are on the ledge, and you get to choose who jumps off, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you choose Stefan to jump off, then he just jumps off and he dies, and then you go back to a previous choice. But if you choose Stefan to jump off, if you choose Colin to jump off, he dies instead. He does it, and he dies instead, and then you see Stefan wake up. Like, you don't see, He
wakes up and he's unsure what happened, and then Colin's missing, but there's no report of his death. So there's all this kind of stuff. So, like I said, it's still a Groundhog's Day concept. Even in that where you don't reset, it's still a Groundhog's Day concept. It's not Groundhog's Day itself. Like, it can be a Groundhog's Day concept. It can play around with the ideas of a time loop and not be the exact structure of the movie itself, you know?
Right.
So that's what I'm saying. It's like they're playing with the time loop trope. Like, big time. They're doing it intentionally in many cases. There's points where you can say, like, oh, I guess you could read into it this way. Because but there's other points in which it's like, no, this is very clearly. You
can argue that going back and redoing a previous choice creates a time loop, but according to the interviews I read, Black Mirror, they say, well, once you get to an ending, that's the ending. That is the ending. Like, even if you're going to go back. So
except when you do go back and make another choice, things change. They're not the same.
They do.
You're
right.
That's the point. That's the point I'm trying to make. It's like Colin says, you made the wrong choice on your first choice you make. If you make the wrong choice, he says, wrong choice, mate. That goes through, gets to your ending, and then you can jump back to that choice. The next time you do it, when you get up to there, Colin says different things than he had said before, even before you make that choice. So there's things change that happened before. So even if you could say that the entire story is in Stefan's head, it still doesn't negate the fact that it's a Groundhog's Day trope. Because the trope is just a storytelling method. It has nothing to do with what's actually happening in the real world of the fictitious world. That doesn't require that. It's only the storytelling mechanism. Sure. And there is definitely a Groundhog's Day storytelling mechanism in this. If you experience, unless you, I guess, maybe if you go through and always make the right choice and never make a single wrong choice until you get to an end and then just stop immediately.
I don't think.
The game doesn't really seem to encourage that behavior. There's only a single ending that doesn't give you a jump back point immediately.
Can you get to that ending without redoing a previous jump back point though? Like, is that even possible?
I don't know. I think you might be able to.
I don't think it is because it's tied. There's a scene which I interpret as the turning point in the story, which I interpret as a turning point on the path to the true ending. There's a scene where the main character, becoming more and more aware of your influence to him, finally just screams out and calls for you to reveal yourself, and you can reveal yourself. The first time the scene happens, you get to choose either the symbol from Bandersnatch or you get to choose PAX.
It's that or Netflix.
No, not the first time around.
First time I did, I got Netflix.
Oh shit! No, I didn't get the first.
So
time.
I don't think that those choices are linked to like the first time you reach the scene. These are the choices you get universally. I think it has to do with other paths.
It must have to do with other paths and choices.
So other choices you made before that affect which are the first two choices you get.
Okay, so that kind of blows my theory because, yeah, then you might be able to get there without redoing a scene based on the choices you made. But based on the choices in front of me, I know, like, I had to redo that scene twice, you know, to get the Netflix to come up.
Whereas for me, that was the first choice I made. The first time I got that scene, the first choice I made was Netflix. So there's a lot going on with the way it paces things out, with the way it gives out there's other things too. That's not the only time in which like a path is blocked to you unless you've unlocked it somehow. Another example would be, when you do go back in time, or I don't think it's when you're back in time. I think it's in the present at the time where you go back and you're breaking into your dad's safe.
Yeah. So you need a specific, this is a thing I was thinking about. When you break into your dad's safe, because you need a specific password to get to a true ending. So, like, the first time I got there, I got, you know, PAX or something else.
Pack or PAX, I think, is what.
Oh, yeah, Pack or PAX.
Pack with, like, the initials, meaning
that's right. PAX with the initials, or, like, Pack is in, like, Pac-Man.
Program and Control, yeah.
Program and Control.
Then PAX is in the demon from the story.
Yeah, that's right. PAX and PAX. Yeah, so I picked Program and Control, which reveals everything to be like a conspiracy. Again, this is where you start to take things with like a grain of salt because you're like, okay, because it leads you through a loop. It was what it does because this is what I did. I did like the pack, and then it showed the whole conspiracy line with like your father being part of some government program and everything being manufactured, you know, and you being part of some experiment, and then that leads to the scene where he's frustrated, he's calling out for you to reveal yourself, and then that leads to a scene where like you can kill your dad, which is interesting because I said no, we're not going to kill dad, that's stupid. So I did that, but then that just throws you, that just leads to like your dad calming you down and then throws you back to the previous choice. Like right away. And I'm like, why'd that end there? Why? I don't understand. But I'm like, okay, fine. So I did again, and I went through it again. I killed my dad this time. I let it happen because that's
you heard it here, police officers listening. Will has killed his father.
No.
He made his confession live on the podcast.
Because it seemed like that was the only way it was going to let me move forward. That just leads you to another ending where your dog, where his dog digs up his dad's corpse, and then he ends up.
Well, when you kill your dad, there's tons of various versions of that. Because one of the ones I did that was my favorite. No, one of the ones I did that was my favorite after killing the dad is it gives you the option to bury him or to chop him up.
That's what I did. I buried him.
I chose chopped him up the first time, and that was my second favorite. No, I don't
even think it gave me that choice.
See, then there's probably something that you didn't do that unlocked that choice.
He just like automatically he just buries him after he kills him, and then the dog digs him up.
Yeah, see, well, that's the thing. Is like it gives you certain choices based on if you unlock them by taking certain other paths before.
Okay.
So there's things that are kind of hidden, you know, like that's what I'm trying to say is like, I think the kind of choices you get, like I had Netflix on my first choice and you didn't get it until like you said, like your third or something. Right. Well, for me, it was like on my first one, you know, and I think that all of that depends on which certain choices you make at which time. So
my point there is like, so that ends with me being in like a mental hospital or something. And then
it was with Stefan being,
that was Stefan with me. The lines are blurred.
You watching him in the mental hospital.
So it ends with the lines are blurred. So it ends with Stefan in the mental hospital, and like that video game review show, that nerdy guy reviewing Bandersnatch and basically saying it's a bit shit. and also the guy who made it went crazy.
See, that's the thing is like I've gotten like 4 different endings with that specific video game review, like 4 different reviews of your game.
Oh yeah,
I've gotten one where they said it was brilliant and was raving about it and talking about how good it was. They said it was like a 4 out of 5 or something. And then later on, like another news report came up saying like a day after they, police raided the home of Stefan and found the chopped up body of his father or something. Mm-hmm. And so like it completely changed. Like in that ending, after chopping up his father, Stefan got some kind of focus and was able to like program his game to the best way because he was like somehow came to some peace. And then turned it in and it got published and everything went through. Everybody loved the game. And then immediately after that, it came out that he had killed his dad.
Oh, okay.
But then there's like other endings too. There's like, you can get the police called on you by...
Well, like I got 2 endings. So like I got the first time when I killed Stefan by throwing him off the house, the porch,
mm-hmm.
whatever you call it. And then like it ends with the game review where, he's calling it the game again a bit shit because it wasn't finished.
Yeah.
And then I got the second one after he killed his dad. But my point is, I'm trying to circle around because we're getting off topic now. But I'm trying to circle around. The point is, after I had Stefan kill his dad, that led to another bad ending and threw me back to a choice. So we go back to the safe, and the choices change. Now it's packs or toy.
Yeah.
And if you click toy, then you unlock a series of events where like you go back in time to when he's a kid and he lost his bear. And then
this is like the true ending, I think.
Yeah, that leads you to a true ending. So I had to go around, that scene a few times just to get toy to pop up so that I can go through and get the true ending.
But that doesn't mean that you can't get it on your first time. It meant that the choices you made before led that to being the way it was.
Right.
So and once it takes you back, it just throws in an option that you hadn't previously unlocked because otherwise you're just stuck doing the same things over and over.
You're just trapped. Otherwise you're just trapped in an unwinnable loop.
Yeah. So basically like it opened up a new path for you because you'd seen that. But I think you can open up that path by making certain choices earlier in the game. So I think you can get to that ending, the toy ending.
Well, if anybody out
without doing a loop,
Well, if anybody out there has managed to do that, we'd love to hear from you.
Yes. If you have, contact at thetotalscreen.com.
Or just comment in the comment section of the YouTube video.
Yeah. Or just, send, or just, call Will on his telephone. His number is this.
Do not do that.
555.
I am not that interested in whether. Not that interested.
No, but I think there's some unlocked, conditions for certain choices that you get. Like you won't get certain choices unless you've reached certain conditions. And then if you reach that point and you don't have those conditions and then you end up looping back to that point again, it might just give it to you even though you hadn't reached the conditions because it's giving you another path. So I think it does things like that. Like I'm pretty sure. And my biggest evidence for that is that, like I said, I got Netflix on my first pass and you didn't get it until like your third. So I don't know exactly. Like I played it again. I was playing it with a friend, letting her kind of make the choices, and she had pack or packs as her choices. Like you were saying, as the password to get into her father's safe or whatever, Stefan's father's safe. But I don't remember that being my first choice. I don't think I even had those two together at any point. I think I don't think I had toy as my first option, but I think I had something else. I can't remember what it was. But yeah, so there's all sorts of different looping paths that take you in different directions and give you different endings. Like I'd say my favorite ending was that I had, was probably the toy ending, what I consider to be the true ending, which you also got.
Well, it's the ending that gives you credits and doesn't throw you back to a previous choice. In fact, it doesn't throw you back to anything. It throws you to the next episode of Black Mirror.
Yes, exactly. Which is weird because this has its own listing in Netflix. Like you don't go to Black Mirror and then go to say, oh, season 5, Bandersnatch or something. No, it's like Black Mirror Bandersnatch has its entirely own listing in Netflix, and yet it throws you right into another episode of Black Mirror, which is just kind of a little interesting thing, about the way it works. Separate but the same. But yeah, like but I'd say that the toy ending was probably my favorite, and that's, like I said, is probably the true ending. And then after that, there was one, which I believe was on the one where you chop up your father. But there's multiple variations of that one. But there's a point where it goes to like the present day, and there's a girl that's repicking up the project, that you took on, that Stefan took on, this whole Bandersnatch thing. She's like, oh, it's an interesting story and everything that happened with them, but, it never went through, and 2 times it's ended in tragedy, but I'm gonna make my own shot at it. And I signed a deal with Netflix, and we're going to do this as like a Netflix choose your own adventure thing. And so it goes through this whole thing, and you start to see where she starts losing her mind, including where she gets the option to throw her tea over her computer in the exact same way that Stefan did. So it's like a callback to that.
Wait, what are you talking about?
This is another ending in Black Mirror that had where like it literally jumped to the present, and there was a female making a Netflix version of Bandersnatch.
Oh wow, I didn't see this.
No, this is after you chop up your dad. So you chop up your dad, you get the video game review talking about like how great the game is, then the follow-up thing talking about how he was arrested soon afterwards. Then it jumps to the future, and you see this girl making this experience, and you start to see her start to go crazy too in doing it. But what's interesting there is that it's heavily alluded to that this girl that's programming this Netflix one is Colin's daughter, the other programmer.
Yeah, because they showed his daughter.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's just all sorts of little interesting ways that they were able to make connections there.
There's a lot of interesting stuff if you take the time and explore.
Yes. There's all sorts of like little weird, interesting connections and different things. There's also like, we talked about last week when we did our top of 2018 picks. You picked for your most interesting scene or best scene was the Do You Want Action scene from this game, from Bandersnatch.
And I know, I was reading, I know a lot of people hate this scene. A lot of people hate this.
They probably hate it because it distracts from the regular narrative, but to me, that's like a plus.
Right.
Because it's like, it's an optional path that you don't have to take. And if you take it, you can reach this weird thing.
Right.
I don't think that's anything to be mad at.
I mean, you can't be mad at it because right from the beginning, like, the path right from the beginning is, like, ridiculous. Because, like, they give you the Netflix logo as a choice. Like, you know if you pick that, you know you're in for some ridiculous shit.
Yeah, and if you don't pick it, then you get to a different ending. So it's...
Yeah. So you can't be mad that you literally picked to show him the Netflix logo.
You can even say it's an Easter egg.
Yeah. You can't be mad that you picked to show him the Netflix logo and it was stupid and ridiculous. Like, obviously.
But there's a different path that neither of us reached, because we talked about this before about when you reach that, when you do the Netflix story and you do the Do You Want to See Action scene, you get to the point where it goes into this like martial arts showdown between you and the therapist. Your father comes in as well at some point, and you have to fight him. And there's different ways that can end. Like if you choose to kick him in the balls, I think it takes you to a dead end or something. Or you can karate chop him. I'm not sure where it goes from there. I can't remember. But what's interesting is before your father jumps into the room, like in the middle of your fight with her, you have an option to continue fighting her or to jump out the window. And you and I had both, at the time we had talked about this, had chosen to continue the fight. I found out later that there's like a even more meta ending that you can get if you jump out the window. So if you choose to jump out the window, he goes to try to jump out the window, and you hear somebody say, "Cut!" and it pulls back, and they're filming it, and they're filming the scene, and the actor's like going crazy.
Yeah.
And so the director's like, "No, this isn't in the script. You don't go for the window, you go for the fight." And he's like, and she calls him like Michael or something, and he said, "No, it's Stefan." And she goes, "Okay, yeah, why don't you sit down for a bit?" And she like walks off, and she's like gets on her walkie-talkie, and she's like, "Yeah, we're gonna need like, medical here or something," because he's like gone insane. And that's another ending. So you can get like this super crazy meta ending that way too. So there's all sorts of little cool things.
Yeah. So Stefan's therapist in this is, I noticed, Alice is played by Alice Lowe, who played Madeline Wool in Garth Marenghi's Dark Place.
Hey, Britain's a small island.
Small island, yeah, exactly. which is like it's always fun when I recognize somebody from that show. I also like Matt Berry. He's in a lot of stuff though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's in Doctor Who. He's in all sorts of stuff.
He was even on Disenchanted.
Yeah, he's in tons of different things. But yeah, so it's Black Mirror. One of the theories I kind of wanted to bring up, and you and I talked about this before, not being recorded, though, is that there's other ways you can look at this whole story. Like we've been talking about Stefan as the protagonist, but there's another argument you could make, and that I've made, in which you could say that he isn't the protagonist, that you're the protagonist, that you're a separate character in the story, and you're controlling Stefan, but not in a direct way. You're influencing him. And this is supported by the idea that not only is he making the choices, but there's points even outside of the point where he's like directly confronting and asking for a sign, that scene that we talked about. There's parts where you choose to do something and he stops himself from doing it. There's one scene when you're in the therapist's office and you can choose like bite your nails or pull your earlobe or something. I never did the pull your earlobe one. I only did the bite your nails. But when I did it, he put his hand up to his mouth, like it was like this weird creepy way, like he was gonna like try to bite off his own hand or something. It was like this really over exaggerated. It wasn't like the way you would just kind of nibble on your fingernails or something. And he like caught himself and stopped and like forced himself to put his hand down. And so there's like, it plays on the idea of this, that you're this force that's controlling him against his will. And it's the choices you make. And so like if you choose the Netflix path, you're basically explaining the Netflix platform to them through the choices you make when you do that. But there's all sorts of different like little bits like that lead you into that idea that this is about a person playing a game in which the character in the game begins to become self-aware. So there's that too, the possibility that none of it's real, that he's a controllable character that you're influencing that comes into his own, that wakes up, kind of Westworld style. So there's an argument for that's the case. There's also an argument you could make in which, like you said, this is all in his head, that he's insane, he's an unreliable narrator, in the same way that, like, say, David is in Legion, or Elliot is in Mr. Robot.
Interesting you bring up Westworld. That's another show that grapples heavily with the concept of free will.
And also, like, what is real and what isn't.
What is real and what isn't, yeah.
So some people might see that as a fault. Like they'll look at the thing and say like, well, you can't even know if when it's end. I also saw an argument saying, well, since the endings are like mutually exclusive, like they can't exist within the same universe, that's a failing in storytelling. And I say like, well, it would be a failing in storytelling if you're directly controlling the path of Stefan.
My disappointment in the story wasn't like a failing in the storytelling so much as the story just kind of doesn't really go anywhere. Like in the way that it ends, like it literally ends with you. I don't even know how to describe it. But you're
talking about the true ending?
Yeah, you mirror travel back in time, and you get the bear so that you find the bear when you're younger, and then you go with your mom on the Stefan goes with his mom on the train, and then obviously we know what happens on that train. That train is fated to crash and kill his mom, but now he's there, and so they die. But then it jumps to the present with Stefan in the therapist's office, and he's just dead, which suggests that all happened in his head. Mm-hmm. And even though it happened in his head, it still killed him somehow.
Well, it kind of plays into the whole urban myth or whatever of like you can't die in your dream.
Right.
You hear that when you're growing up, people would say, oh yeah, you can't die in your dream because then you die in real life. And it's this weird urban myth that got passed around everywhere. And so I think that kind of plays on that idea of like, if that's in his head, he died in his head, so he really died.
So he really, yeah.
So, I mean, that's one way you could look at it. is also open to interpretation.
Like, he mentally time traveled and somehow died in the past, but then his body's still in the present. I don't know. Don't try to think too hard.
Well, then he didn't. Well, the point is, then he didn't actually time travel. He just time traveled in his dream or something.
Yeah, he time traveled. That's how I interpreted it. Because going through a mirror and time traveling, I just said that's no way that's actually real.
Well, that also plays into what Colin said, though, of there being different dimensions and how it doesn't matter what happens in one dimension because there's others.
Yeah.
So there's like a lot of this stuff that some people think comes out of nowhere. It's like, well, they actually did leave like clues and hints and things towards all that.
But that ending is like the true ending. That's how you get to the credits, is like that. And as far as I know, there aren't any other endings in Bandersnatch that throw up the credits and say, okay, next episode.
I haven't seen another one. I don't know if there is or isn't.
I haven't heard of anything else, or I haven't seen anything else. So I'm going to call it at that. If anybody knows of any other ones, I'd be interested.
Yeah, there's so many different variations of different endings. So it could be like an ending that you have seen is also a true ending, but there was just one condition of part of that ending that you didn't get, so you didn't get the credits.
Right.
You know, there's like all sorts of different things. Like the whole thing, if you bury the body, one of the ways you can get caught is the dog digging up the body. But there's other ways too. There's also the possibility that the guy, Colin's wife, visits you and is freaked out by your behavior and calls the police on you. Another one is, and this is like, these are actual ones, you know? Another one that happens with the body being buried is that there's one where you can call your therapist and you basically threaten the receptionist that you're like coming for, that you tell her you killed your father and you're coming for, the therapist as well, because you know that they were in on this thing to control you. And when you do that, instead of like anybody digging up the body, you just hear the police sirens because they're coming for you, because this person reported you for saying that.
Right.
So there's like, it could be that like maybe you would get an ending that you already got would have like a true ending variation if you unlocked certain things. And it just so happens that the toy ending has no such conditions. You just get the true ending if you pick that choice.
Right.
So there's all sorts of different, like, there's supposed to be like millions of possibilities in this, so who knows, you know?
Who knows? Nobody knows for real.
Yeah. They said that there's even some endings, like Charlie Brooker, the creator of Black Mirror, said there's some endings that they can't even find, like themselves.
Right.
Like that they filmed, they put it in there, and then they can't find them. So maybe there is a way to get them. Maybe they accidentally blocked off entire pathways and there's actually no way to get to them. But I don't know. There's stuff in there that even they can't find. But yeah, I mean, what do you think the story is? You think it's a story that's all in his head? Do you think it's a story in which...
I think at the end of the day, I think the reason why that particular ending is the main ending is because I think the story is literally about he's trying to cope with the loss of his mother. At the end of the day, I think like everything he does, throwing himself into Bandersnatch, throwing himself into creating this program.
Well, even the book, the whole thing that Bandersnatch is based on was something he found in his mother's belongings.
Yeah, something. So I think it's really about a young man still trying to cope with the loss of his mother, even though it happened when he was a lot younger. He's still having issues with dealing with it, and I think that's ultimately what it's about. Which in that respect, when you distill it down to that, it's something that I can very much relate to on a personal level. And so and when I saw like the ending, the true ending, I thought, you overthink it, but I thought it was beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did too. I was a little emotional watching it, you know, there's all sorts of different ways to look at it. But I mean, I think the main argument I'm trying to make here is I think a lot of people are giving this a bad rap. And I think that you need to account for a few things. One is that there are different ways to approach this. And several of those ways include things like Stefan isn't actually experiencing any of this. This is all in his head. Or Stefan isn't the main character. He's he's being controlled by a more godlike figure or a person that's godlike to him, in which your choices don't only affect him but affect other things. Like when you choose which cereal he picks, like you see a commercial later on for that cereal, that's outside of Stefan's control, that commercial would be.
It's highly telling to me that when you get the choice to enter the password to the safe, that's a pivotal choice in the episode, in the film. That's a pivotal choice because you're thrown up with like so many different scenarios right there, and they either lead to dead ends or they lead you to the true, or one choice in particular leads you on the path to a true ending. So that is the pivotal moment. And the reason it's pivotal is because, again, you do get, PAX, position and control, which again, I don't think that's not real. There was no conspiracy. Again, I think when you get to that moment, it's more about Stefan trying to cope with the loss of his mother. So he's trying to open the safe, and inside the safe is the teddy bear that was hidden from him, which caused his mother to be late and die on the train. That's what's ultimately really in that safe.
Yeah.
And so I think the other scenarios are kind of like stuff Stefan's mind comes up with to kind of explain or deal with, explain what happened. Like, oh, his mother didn't really die. It was a conspiracy, that perpetrated, but his father was involved in.
Textbook like paranoid disorders,
Yeah. So I think ultimately it's about that. And I think that's why, like, if you get these different scenarios that things don't quite make sense, well, you're seeing things through like his lens, his distorted lens at times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's another way to look at it, and that's I think a very accurate way to look at it. But yeah, I think that's one thing that needs to be taken into account when judging this. The other is the ambition of the project itself. And I talked to you before about how I always talk about Lost, for example.
We talked last week about how technically ambitious this was.
Yes. And it's not even just, but it's not even just on the technology that Netflix is using, but there's also the ambition of making choices that can link together. That has to be thought out. They have to think, well, if you do this, then that has to affect this in this way. So there's a lot of stuff that has to be thought out, a lot of stuff that has to be made flexible, and that makes it harder to tell a really strong narrative. That's why, video games almost never have narratives that are as good as what you'd have in a movie or a TV show or a book.
Right.
Because interactivity makes it harder. Because it makes it that you have to...
You can't have a game where you play a character and you entirely control their actions and what they do and build a cohesive narrative around that, because then you would have to literally have to predict everything that the player would do.
Yeah, every time.
And
it makes it harder. And I think degree of difficulty should always kind of be taken into account when you do that. And like I've talked about before, I always talk about Lost and why I think it's the best show ever made, to me, in my opinion. Not just my favorite, but the best, because of its ambition. It's because it's not just that it's a really good show and really well acted and well written and has great music and everything, but it's because it's coming from a higher degree of difficulty. And I compare that to like gymnastics or ice skating in the Olympics, where people aren't competing for the same scores. Like somebody might get, an 8.0 or something. I don't even know if that's the actual scale point, or if it tops out at 5 or whatever. But they might be skating in a program where the top you can get is 8, where somebody else might score a 6 in a program in which you can score a 10, and the 10 would be the more ambitious project. You can get more points than the other person could get, even if they did theirs perfectly, because not only, they might have done theirs perfectly, but they did it perfectly at a lower degree of difficulty. So I think that always needs to be taken into account when you look at like how good a TV show is, or what your final impression of a show is. Like, what is it doing and how well does it do that? Because something that's not ambitious shouldn't necessarily get away with going like, oh yeah, this is like perfect in every way, but it's not really ambitious, so it's easy. Like it's not taking it's not doing anything hard, So I think like something like this is super ambitious, and that needs to be taken into account when you do it. Still, that being said, I'd put this like somewhere in the middle of Black Mirror as all of the stories, you know?
Right.
As far as like how much I like it or how good I think it is. Like there's other ones that I think are significantly better, and there's others that I think are significantly worse. Like to me, this isn't at the same level as like, say, White Christmas or 15 Million Merits, or for you, San Junipero, you know, which is like your favorite, but it's also nowhere near as bad as, say, that, like, you know, Robotic Bees episode.
No.
You know?
Bees! The bees! That episode that needed Nicolas Cage to, like, just be perfect.
Yeah. So it kind of falls somewhere in the middle to me. Like, it's not as good as the most memorable, amazing episodes of Black Mirror, but it's also not Robot Bees. It's not that soldier that thinks he's seen mutants.
On that line, I also don't want to see like another episode of Black Mirror, like do this choose your own adventure thing.
Well, they've already done it, so it's
they've already done it. Well, and also I just think like it works here because it's heavily tied to like the narrative and like the themes that they want to explore.
Yes.
The concepts that they want to explore.
Yes, very much so. I completely agree with you on that. This is an episode that's basically a choose your own adventure that is very much about choose your own adventure. And that's what makes it work to me.
Again, like it's interesting because Black Mirror is a show all about criticizing technology and kind of casting doubt on technology. Are new technological innovations really that great? Like, and kind of like look how they can go wrong. And I think in a cheeky way, it's like this episode of Black Mirror, like they invented this new technology to do this episode, and then the episode is criticizing it at the same time.
You could do that, yeah. I think that the creator of Black Mirror, and I'm just going to paraphrase him because I'm not going to look it up, the way he described the intention of Black Mirror was that although it is very much like, and he says himself, like he's very much like a worrier when it comes to stuff like technology, he says that what the show's really about is the idea that technology can have like side effects in the same way he said if technology is a drug and it very much feels like it is a drug, then what are its side effects?
Right.
So it's not so much about like technology bad, but it's like if technology like this exists, how does that affect society? And then the commentary is not so much on the technology, but on how society was affected by the technology. So but that's Black Mirror Bandersnatch. If you haven't played it already, we've spoiled everything for you. But there's still probably millions of other possibilities. So go and play it on Netflix.
Don't be listening to this podcast. I probably said that too late.
Yeah.
Well, you can,
whoopsie daisy.
you can go ahead and edit that soundbite into like the beginning of the podcast.
I'm too lazy for that. But yeah, so definitely check it out. Play it on Netflix. I guess you can't play it on Apple TV or Chromecast. I did play it on a Roku at my friend's house, so I know that works. I know it works on computers and it works on tablets and phones.
I played it on Firefox on my desktop.
Yeah.
So it worked just fine.
So I think the only things it doesn't work on right now are Chromecast and Apple TV. So if you have anything besides those two, which if you have Chromecast, you have to have something else because it doesn't work unless you're casting. So if you have anything besides those two, then you should be able to play through it. Next up is The Good Place. This episode titled The Book of Dougs. And this is our return to The Good Place this is our winter break return. We had our last episode was kind of a surprise. Like we didn't know it was coming until like right before it aired.
Yeah.
And that was the episode Janet's.
And basically, the episode ended, they ended up in Heaven's mailroom.
Yes. They're in the good place, and they kind of discover that they're in the good place because Eleanor can't curse.
Yeah. She says,
We had brought up then that I guess that means they're in the good place unless they pull a swerve on us because, of course, the bad place from the first season, she also couldn't swear. So who knows? We kind of weren't sure, but we found out.
Well, you say that, but then you got to remember that Michael specifically modeled the bad place
after the good place, yeah.
After the good place, yeah, to appear to be the good place because of the con he was pulling. So
that's what we were theorizing when we were talking about Janet's, was like, well, maybe they're not in the good place, so they're in some other controlled fake version of it or something.
Oh yeah. That they could always pull that swerve.
Yeah, they didn't really. They kind of did, kind of didn't.
Well, they kind of held back on actually showing us the good place because this is like the mail room of the good place or something, and it's kind of walled off from the actual good place.
Yeah, it was a big plot point actually of the episode where they had just like on the other side of that door is the good place,
It's like, but that's only one of the entrances. Oh, and humans can't use that.
I think was it Eleanor said it's like 3 Oreos or something from the
Oreos.
separating them from the good place.
Eleanor kind of goes crazy, like being so close to the good place. So she kind of like attacks that door with everything she's got,
She's going kind of crazy from it. She's grappling with a lot of fear too, which comes out in her storyline that, Chidi, like at one point, he's trying to comfort her. He's trying to
comfort her. Yeah, through the whole thing, she's trying to get through that door and he's there trying to tell her, it's okay, they'll figure it out, they've got each other. Like
he ends up dressing as a mailman because he knows that'll probably get to one of her fetishes.
Well, she mentions that at the beginning of the episode. Like she mentions like a calendar she had, right, where she didn't get.
Oh, that's right.
Of mailmen, where she didn't get past March.
Yeah. And so Chidi dresses up as a mailman, and her reaction is to cry.
Yeah.
And it's not like tears of happiness. It's kind of like frustration and fear.
Yeah.
It's the idea that she's she for the first time she's experiencing like actual love, and now she's terrified that it can be taken away from her. So it's like her first time experiencing the fear of loss, And so she's freaking out about that, and her and Chidi are talking about it. He's trying to kind of calm her down. They end up having sex. That's kind of the end of their storyline. But that's not kind of the main story of what's going on in this episode. That's kind of like the side story, I guess. Or one of the side stories. Kind of the main storyline is that they arrive at this mailroom, and Michael says, okay, well, we have 2 things we need to do. First, we need to get rid of, the evidence that we came in through there or something. And so, Janet blows up the mailbox that they came through. And she's all, okay, what's the next step? And he said, to have discretion or to keep a low profile. Completely undone by that. But basically, the explosion and other things going on bring a mailman to them or mailwoman to them who's like this perfect example of positivity. It's kind of hilarious. Even when she gets mad later in the episode, she's all, I'd shake my fist at you, and she's trying, but all she can do is wave. She can't actually shake her fist. But yeah, so she's there. She's before that moment in which she finds out that they were lying to her, which is only because they admitted it. They could have lied to her again and she probably would have believed it. But she's very gullible. She kind of believes whatever it is. They'll say something outlandish and she's all like, I don't know if I could believe that, but I do. And so she's always kind of like relentlessly positive, even buying stories like Michael saying that these humans were here because they won a contest. Even after he had proposed that to the group before and they'd kind of like said no, and he said, I'll come up with something better before then, and then immediately defaults to that same story. But my favorite was she even bought what Jason said when they're like, oh yeah, we came through the mailbox, we're being chased by, something scary. He's all like Dracula, and he probably flew up the mailbox with his bazooka.
Yeah.
And they're like, really, Jason? And he's like, yeah. But she just kind of buys all of that. Michael's able to kind of like convince her that, so how do I reach, the committee or this committee to talk to people about, like a problem that's happened or something. And she said, oh, well, you reach them by calling on this phone, but you can't do that. I'm not allowed to let you. And he's like, well, would you know if I did? And she's like, no, of course not. There's no way to know. But you can't do it because that's not allowed. And he ends up just basically creating a diversion to send her away and makes a phone call anyways. He reaches a committee. They end up showing up through, like, they open up a gate and show up. And it's a group led by, Paul Scheer, comedian Paul Scheer. And they're completely ineffectual.
Yeah, they're completely. I love this because some people like are saying like they were making fun of like toothless liberalism, which is like you gotta be like nice and polite and you gotta be like mindful of everybody's feelings and then never get anything done.
Yeah.
Because they're like, okay, we formed a committee to look into it. It'll take 400 years. And he's
that's
like,
just to pick the committee members.
No, they say it'll take 400 years, and Michael's like, 400 years to look into it? And he's like, no, to pick the committee. And then I'll take one, and then we need to form a blue ribbon committee to investigate the committee to make sure like everybody in the committee is good. And that's going to take another 1,000 years.
And Michael's trying to get through to him. He's like, in the meantime, you're going to have all these people being tortured. And he's like, oh, that's so horrible. They're like, oh, that's so horrible. We should, form another committee to look into our behavior for taking so long. It's like endless red tape, basically, getting in the way of anything getting done. So Michael's really frustrated. He's like trying to get through to them that the bad place has influenced the results of who gets into the good place. And it's just not working. And we can progress on where his story is going, but before that, we need to go into the other sub-story, which is that
it's the Tahani, Janet, and Jason stuff coming to a head. Because in the last episode, we saw that Tahani and Jason saw inside Janet, Janet's stuff about Jason and how she was married to him and all this stuff.
Yes. And Jason comes to Tahani and is like very sweet and saying, like, I don't know what to do, and so Tahani's like, well, you got to talk to her and trying to figure out a way to get them to talk. And so the two of them go together and talk to Janet about it, who's really embarrassed that they saw her Jason diary. But she's also like, she's telling him like, no, don't do this. I'm trying to be neutral, Janet, and I can't show emotions, and you're causing emotions to come out. And it's really embarrassing when emotions come out. Maybe do you think they'll come out of my butt?
Yeah. Do you think they'll come out of my butt? And she's like, no, later on, she's like, the emotions are coming out and they're coming out of my face.
But yeah, so there's all this.
She's like, the emotions are coming out, but they're not coming out of my butt. They're coming out of my face, which is still embarrassing. Yeah.
So they're trying to kind of navigate this, and Tahani feels ineffectual in this, and I'm using that word intentionally because she goes to Michael and is talking about everything that they're doing to kind of skate around the issue and how they can't get anything done to resolve the issue between Janet and Jason. And this gives Michael his clue that it isn't the bad place interfering with the good place that's causing all of these problems. It's the fact that life has become so much more complicated than it used to be. And they tie into an idea, which is, it's a philosophical idea that's like in modern philosophy. Two people order roses. One person from a time period long ago brings roses to his grandmother or his mother or something like that, and got this many points. Whereas another person did it in the modern era, but he did it on a cell phone that was made, in China by children, that's made out of conflict minerals and stuff.
This is why I love this episode for making this point, which is insane because like this is a point that I don't see anybody bring up when you're in the middle of like a fierce political debate or whatever. Nobody says this. This is like literally nobody says this. And for like a half an hour comedy on NBC to point this out is insane. But it's pointing out that the world is an insanely complicated, complex thing, and bad shit happens for sure. Like there are all kinds of bad elements, but they point out like even the best intentions, like there's like they point out, like even with the best intentions, like if you buy roses, you probably contributed, to some misery in the world because of like, because
and not just on one level, on like many different levels.
Many different levels. and just because like the complex systems that support the society that we live in. And it's not, there are no easy answers. So we live in a world that's heavily complex and heavily flawed, and there are no easy answers to it. You can't just shout, oh, well, like everything will be like utopia if like one party is in control or the other or whatever, or everything. It's all complex. It's all, and for the good place to make this point of all things is like, yeah.
Yeah. Proving again how brilliant it can be when it comes to philosophy for a TV show. But yeah, it's
I see people like online saying, oh yeah, it's totally like bashing capitalism. It's totally gonna like end with them saying capitalism is evil. And I'm like, no, it's gonna end with, shit is complicated, yo. It's a lot more intellectual than that.
Yeah, well, it's also like it's coming to a turning point with this episode with Michael's realization for the series, in which it's saying that because things are complicated, it's not even necessarily that our characters are on the side of the angels or trying to even be on the side of the angels, because what we've seen is that the side of the angels is a convoluted mess that doesn't get anything done.
Yeah, exactly. The side is like, so basically the point they're making is the system's broken.
Yes. That we live in more complicated times and things have changed and we need to relook at everything.
So the point system that the afterlife uses, that has to change and evolve with the times.
Yes. And so, the episode ends with, the Gwendolyn, the mailroom employee, finally realizing that they've been lying to her, with them admitting it too. And, she says, well, I have no choice. I have to call the judge. And Michael says, don't bother. I already did. And we see a door open and, the guy comes through. That's the guy that loves frogs, that guards the gate to Earth.
Yes. Because then he smells like frogs.
Yeah, we didn't even bring that up, that heaven smells like everyone's favorite thing.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. Heaven's like for Tahani, it smells like curtains, like separating first class from like.
Yeah. For Eleanor, of course, it's kind of gross. It's like a water park, and it's like all the gross smells of a water park too, but like mostly just like the hormones in the air.
Yeah.
And then I really liked Chidi's one, which was that he's all it smells like, I think he said something like fresh baked, like soft pretzels or something. He said, wait a minute, no, it smells like perfect moral answer or something like
moral
certainty or
moral relativism or something like that.
And Janet's like, oh yes, those do smell similar. So they're all kind of experiencing that. There's also like, before we get back on topic, there's also everything tastes too, because like when Eleanor was crying, she was talking about how her tears, like she didn't want to stop crying because her tears tasted so good. I can't remember what she said they tasted like, but she liked the taste of her tears too much to stop crying. But that brings us back. So the guy came through, he said it smells like frogs in there. He said that the judge had accepted Michael's terms and would meet them at IHOP. So they're like, Jason's like, oh, we're going to IHOP? That's cool, and Michael's like, no, IHOP's the most dangerous place in the world. But what's great here is that he used the whole name for what IHOP stands for in the afterlife, which is the interdimensional hole of pancakes, which I thought was hilarious because I knew they were going to have some other acronym and then it was just going to be similar to IHOP. But I like the fact that it starts that way and then just gives up and still ends up with of pancakes.
Yeah.
Like it's not the international hole of problematic thought or something. It's the international hole or not international, interdimensional hole of pancakes. I just thought was brilliant. But yeah, that's the end of the episode. I thought it was great. Really enjoyed it. I like the emotional connection between Chidi and Eleanor and what she was going through in the episode. And I really thought that what they came to, what Michael came to, is for why nobody's getting into the good place is kind of profound. It also ties into, you had looked up or found somebody else that had looked up something on one of our previous podcasts. You had talked about that the year that it goes back to for when the last person reached the good place had to do with like the creation of money, like in the timeline, and that money is like the root of all evil. In a sense, this ties in because money is what complicates things, you know?
Yeah,
and the barter system, everything was kind of pure. But now when you have money as a representation of all the behind the scenes.
Another thing that complicates it is globalization, because everything is more connected now than it was way back back in the days that they were talking about when people were still going to the good place. Everything is a lot more connected to everything else.
Yeah. Well, what I was going to bring up with the bartering is that when you barter, you know exactly what you're getting and for exactly what you're trading, you know? It's very direct. But with money, the money is just a representation of everything that's happening behind the scenes.
I love the line in the episode where Michael's trying to convince the committee, that there's something wrong, that because he's like nobody has gotten into the good place for like 500 years. And then the one guy in the committee is like, well, there have been dips before. Remember when humans invented stabbing? And it's like they went crazy with stabbing each other.
Yeah, the rough patches in history. But yeah, this is interesting. So it'll be cool to see kind of how this resolves and where they go forward with this. I think there's only a few episodes left this season. I think there's only supposed to be 13 this season.
Oh, okay.
And this was episode 10 or 11, depending on how you count the first one. So not many left. But yeah, that's it for this week's podcast topics. Here's what's coming up in the week ahead. Like, as I said, we're recording this on Sunday, January 13th, but our date for when stuff is coming up starts on Friday, the Friday before. So on Friday, January 11th, 2019, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend returned to the CW. Friends from College returned on Netflix. Future Man returned for its second season on Hulu. I'm like 2 episodes in and loving it so far, of the second season, I mean. Sex Education debuted on Netflix. That's with Gillian Anderson in it. Informer debuted on Amazon Prime. Really don't know anything about that one. Then today, as we're recording this on January 13th, 2019, Victoria returned to TBS. Valley of the Boom, a miniseries about the Silicon Valley, debuted on National Geographic.
They've been advertising that as like a miniseries about the 90s.
Valley of the Boom?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about Silicon Valley in the 90s.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
That's the valley in the Valley of the Boom.
Okay. Yeah.
There was a big boom in Silicon Valley that, like, it was a big bubble and then it popped.
Yep.
It was like the web bubble, the .com bubble.
I think the big poster child for the bubble pop was like pets.com.
Yeah, it popped, I think, in the early 2000s, but it started in the 90s.
Whatever company that was, I had like the sock puppet dog for a mascot.
Yeah. The pets.com had like a Super Bowl commercial.
Yeah.
It's like, what? But then the big thing that debuted this week, and we're going to be talking about it next week, is they put up the first 2 episodes of True Detective on HBO. That's also where they had the commercial for, or the ad for Game of Thrones that revealed the release date that I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast was like aired right before True Detective. So, of course, because HBO is going to use one of their highest profile shows to advertise another one of their highest profile shows, as usual. But yeah, so that's when we found out about that date. But True Detective, we're going to be talking about that next week. Monday, January 14th, 2019, tomorrow from when we're recording this, probably around when I'm putting this up though. It probably won't be up until Monday. The Passage comes to Fox. The Good Doctor returns to ABC, and Those Who Can't returns to True TV. Tuesday, January 15th, Corporate returns to Comedy Central. Drunk History returns to Comedy Central. The Flash is back on the CW. Roswell, New Mexico. It's like a new adaptation of that, like how they brought back Charmed. Well, now they're bringing back Roswell as well. That comes to the CW. Teachers returns to TV Land, and This Is Us returns to NBC. Then on Wednesday, January 16th, 2019, Schitt's Creek returns to Pop. Deadly Class debuts on Sci-Fi, but the first episode is currently available on YouTube. I highly recommend it. It's really good. It has a bit of a Mr. Robot kind of vibe to it too. So if you like that, it's like Mr. Robot, a little bit of Magicians, few other elements in there. It's good. All-American debuts on the CW, or returns to CW, I mean. Riverdale returns to the CW, and Wayne debuts on YouTube Premium. This is another one I'm really looking forward to. It's from the writers of Deadpool, and it looks really kind of interesting and weird. But it's YouTube Premium, so, use your best judgment if it's worth it for you, or if you just want to hold off until Cobra Kai Season 2 comes out. Then Thursday, January 17, 2019, A Discovery of Witches comes to Shudder. Star Trek Discovery returns to CBS All Access. Supernatural back on the CW. Grey's Anatomy on ABC. Can't believe that show's still on. How to Get Away with Murder back on ABC. And A Million Little Things back on ABC. And then lastly, on Friday, January 18, 2019, Dynasty back on the CW. Butterfly on Hulu. Grace and Frankie returns on Netflix. The Grand Tour back on Amazon Prime. That's the spiritual successor to Top Gear. And The Punisher on Netflix. So normally I live tweet The Punisher. I'm not able to do that because of my work schedule. But yeah, Punisher, enjoy that season and then wait a week and then anticipate the announcement that the Punisher has been canceled by Netflix.
Yeah, pretty much. Enjoy it because it's probably the last Punisher you'll see for a long time.
Yes. Unfortunately, but that's just the case. But yeah, looks like it's going to be a good season, so check that out. Next week, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about True Detective Season 3, the first 2 episodes. We're also going to be talking about The Good Place, which is back, and we talked about this week, so we're going to be talking about the next week's episode next week. So that's it. Thank you, everybody, for listening. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Tyson Gifford. You can follow Will. He is at Foxel Hero. Will, you have some other things you wanted to plug?
Yep, I'm going to be streaming on Twitch and YouTube as Pixel Champion sometime soon.
Look out for that. You can check out our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, as well as our site, thetotallscreen.com. And you can subscribe to the podcast through any major podcasts like iTunes or Pocket Cast. And the entire backlog of our podcast is available on our YouTube channel, along with other content. So check that out. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Good night.
Good night.
If you would like to reach out to us and make a comment, send an email to contact@thetotalscreen.com. Stay tuned to The Total Screen for the very